This is Sterling Marn, and this is my new Let's Play series for the game Towns. Specifically, I'm playing the 0.47b version, the current beta of Towns. I'm going to go ahead and get right into the game while I talk about it some more. I'm going to be playing on a normal map. I have gone through and loaded a few to make sure that I get a good map for a Let's Play series. If this is your first time through, don't necessarily just go with the absolute first map that gets generated for you. Um, feel comfortable playing around, looking around at the map, and making sure that it's a good start for you. Specifically, I had a start once where my entire town, all my townspeople, spawned directly onto a huge group of froggies like these over here. I mean, these were my people right here with 8 or 9 froggies on top of them that just instantly swarmed them, and more than half of my people died, and it was just a horrible, horrible way to start. Don't try to make that your first game. This is a good one, although I am on the same side of the river as the froggies on a normal map. I've got some distance. They're really isolated over here, and they don't really travel around too much. Um, Townsville, like I said, is still in beta. This is not the full version of the game. That has not yet been released, but if you purchase it now, you pre-purchase it before the actual release, you do get access to the most current beta at all times. Um, I do kind of like this for a start. It's a little closer to the Froggies than I wanted, but what I'm looking for is a nice big open grassy area like this where I'll have a lot of room for fields and farms and that sort of thing. I'm going to be building primarily above ground. My last games I've always built below ground, so I'm looking for something a little different. I've also got some stones, so this will be an initial area where I can dig down and use this as a stone mine, which will be handy. And I've got trees for wood, so I've really got everything. Lots of nearby wheat to harvest to start up my farms with. So we're going to make this my starting area. The first thing you always want to do, or I guess not always want to do, I guess there's more than one way to play towns, that's for sure. It's very much a sandbox. But wood is such a critical resource. I'm going to go ahead and get my people chopping some wood. Um, So that way I can go ahead and build my first building, which is going to be a workshop, a carpentry workshop that I'm going to build using log walls. So right over here, generally between the stone grass border, and actually maybe even a little closer to the woods here, I'm going to go ahead and build out my first log wall, which I'm using for my workshop. I'm doing an interior, was that 4 by 4? This is bigger than it absolutely has to be. You can get away with a 3 by 3 interior for most buildings. But I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bigger so I can fit a few benches and other types of items like that in here. I'm going to go ahead and create my zone. And you'll see right now I've got the game paused. My people are doing nothing. And that's because I want to get some orders queued up to make sure that there isn't any idle time at first. It's going to be very crucial that as quickly as possible I get some basic production up and running. That's just so critical early in the game. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the game paused while I get these initial zones set up. So the carpentry zone is the first one we're building, like I said earlier, so we just drag that out. And so I've enclosed it in walls, log walls, because that's the only thing we can build at the time, because all it requires is wood with no buildings. Once we get our carpentry set up, we'll be able to use wooden walls, which do not decay, as opposed to these log walls, which will over time decay. Uh, and that will also enable us to begin eventually building a mason's bench, which would then allow us to build stone walls. So we're at a good point where we've gotten our first zone set up, our first wall set up. We've got some orders to start chopping down some trees. I also do want to identify some fruit trees. I'm going to go ahead and give a harvest order over a handful of these. Just so that there is some food on the ground. My villagers now, if they do get hungry, will come over and eat this fruit. It's not the best source of food for them. It's time consuming relative to the amount of nourishment it provides, but it'll give me something so that way I don't have people going into hunger lock early on while I get my bread production line set up. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a second building right now. Or actually, we're going to go ahead. This should be a good um, point to start, although I am going to also set up a stockpile right here in the trees, generally close to my workshop. I'm going to set up a small stockpile of raw materials. After I create the stockpile, though, I can go ahead and hit Manage Stock. I can right-click on it and choose Manage Stockpile. I'm going to disable everything. Then I'm going to go back into it. I'm going to go into Materials, and I'm going to enable Wood. This means that this stockpile will hold wood. Any idle villagers will go around and pick up the wood that just gets dropped next to the trees after they're chopped down and consolidate it here onto the stockpile. It can be very handy. It can just be more efficient that if there are idle people, they'll bring it closer to my carpentry. And at the same time, it makes it easy for me to visually see how much wood I have. If this is full, then I've got enough wood to build my next building. If it's completely empty, I need to go chop some trees because my people can't build anything right now. And actually, I will go ahead and do one more thing. I'm going to go ahead and create my first tilled area. We'll go ahead and make it 3 by 6. Let's make it 4 by 6. What they're going to do is they're going to till the grass here. That tilled ground can then be planted upon. Specifically, we'll be planting some wheat. But that's a good amount of orders that we have queued up, so we'll go ahead and unpause the game. We'll see my 11 starting villagers will instantly start spreading out to carry out the various tasks, which is based partly on priorities. We've got our priorities panel here. We see that baking and cooking is the top task, so everyone would have tried to do that, but I have no baking or cooking that needs to be done. So people would have switched to gathering and harvesting, which there's a lot of gathering to be doing, so that's what people are doing. It gets followed by mining and tilling and item construction, and we can see they're already starting to till, so it did not take long for them to already get down to that priority. They do work quickly. Things like taking the wood and bringing it to the stockpile is the absolute lowest priority we'll see. But we see they went ahead and gathered the fruits. There's a whole bunch of fruit laying on the ground, which again is a good thing that my people will have some food. And now we can go ahead and plant. Planting changed recently if you've been playing some of the older betas. And I'm actually going to lower the speed. It looks like my speed got raised up to 3, which is faster than normal speed. I'm going to lower it down to 2, which is normal speed. But I'm going to go ahead and start queuing up some wheat planting, which is now planted in rows, which is new. It used to be a 3 by 3 block that you would set down. And now we'll go ahead and start harvesting some wheat, but not these blue flowers that I accidentally gathered. As the wheat gets harvested, it will actually be taken and converted into a permanent wheat seedling here. In the future, this wheat seedling will grow into normal wheat instead of wild wheat, which will be harvested and turned back into a seedling and providing the wheat that could then be turned into flour. So I'm going to go around and harvest as many of these as possible without getting close to the froggies. When I'm not harvesting the wild wheat, if I run out of wild wheat, harvesting the regular wheat will in turn then be used to plant more wheat. So until all of my wheat is planted, I won't have any wheat available for flour and bread production. So we'll try and harvest as much of the wild wheat as we can, that way we can get this farm area filled up as quickly as possible. We see I did also run out of wood pretty quickly, so I'm going to queue up an even larger area for chopping. I've got no wood in this area where we cleared out the trees and none in my stockpile, which prevented the walls from being completed. But now that we do have our carpentry zone, we can go ahead and build our first carpenter's bench. After the carpenter's bench gets built, I'm going to build a wood detailer's bench. You can see when I hover over it that one of the requirements for the wood detailer is a carpenter's bench, so I can't quite queue that up yet. Well, actually I can try to, and you'll see when I click, eventually up here in the top left corner in your message section, I'll get a red message that says cannot build, because when it tries to, it'll see that there is no carpenter's bench. So these seedlings will eventually over time grow into full-sized wheat. Let's go ahead and keep looking around in the meantime to see if we can't find some more wild wheat, though. Speed that process along. There is no specific command that would harvest or gather just the wild wheat, so I can't just draw a huge square over a whole area to get all of it. That would result in tons of fruit and other items being gathered, which would consume a lot of my people's time, which you really just cannot afford early on. It's so key to get this production set up. And I'm going to go ahead and pause it because I really don't have a lot of stuff queued up right now, but you can see the wood detailer can't be built, needs an accessible carpenter's bench, which is the error I was talking about. However, in the meantime, a carpenter's bench has been built, so I can go back into my utilities section, click on the wood detailer. We'll build that on the opposite side of the room. I could build multiple carpenter's benches and multiple wood detailers, and in the future I will. It's one of the reasons I made this room bigger than is absolutely necessary. But for now, we'll be fine with just the one. We'll also go ahead, and now that we have a carpenter's bench, and build a proper wooden door instead of just a log door, which would be our other option. So we'll go ahead and click on wooden door and hit that, and it's going to put a roof over this building. Once you've enclosed a building entirely in walls and a door like that, you will get a roof put on that building, which we'll see shortly. I'm also going to go ahead and queue up my first mine entrance, even though I'm not going to be able to use it quite yet. So by hitting the dig command, I'm going to dig out a single square over here. Next step in that process is building a ladder, which actually does only need a carpenter's bench, so I can go ahead and queue that up by hitting ladder and clicking there. That's going to put a ladder inside of that hole, which will then allow my people to come down here and start mining, which I'm going to go ahead and queue up a nice sized area to get mined. You can see I chose this area because it's going to be over some stone, which will very quickly then provide a source of stone for my people. We see them bringing in some wheat seedlings and planting those down. I'm going to go into the building section. Actually, I'm not going to go to the building section. The whole purpose of the wheat is to eventually put it inside of a mill to be turned into flour, but we see that requires some stone before I can produce the mill, which we don't currently have any access to. So, but we can go ahead and produce it anyways. Why not? All right, I'm going to go ahead and queue this up. It shouldn't actually fail out for the lack of stone, but eventually some stone will be available once some mining happens down here. Once that stone is available, it'll be dropped off here along with a cow and some wood, and this will be turned into a functional mill, which can then turn the wheat into flour. I'm going to check over here. I still do have some fruit, which is good. I want to make sure that I always have some food on the ground for my people, and I'm going to also go ahead and create a raw food barrel. Zones are good at the start, but now that we do have some carpentry type access, I can go ahead and produce a barrel, which I'm going to go ahead and place right near my farm for now. Then I'm going to queue up to hold, for now, just apples and pears. In the future, I'm going to change this to be used for my farm for the purpose of wheat, but if I have any spare people just sitting around, I want them to go ahead and gather up some of that fruit that's over there and put it inside of a barrel, which will also make it easier for me to track how much fruit I have, having it all consolidated like that. But we see the wood detailer's now been produced. We see some good amount of mining has happened, but we're going to go ahead and queue up some more, just to make sure we have a really nice stockpile of stone. And I'm going to go ahead and put up some wooden walls for my next building. We're going to use the same dimensions as we did for our last building. You'll see that I'm not going to try and put my door here and just build a solid wall. Oops, that's actually a little bit off. I have to go ahead and cancel a portion of that wall. But you need to have the door has to be placed in a section of wall where the wall is traveling the same direction, parallel. I couldn't put a door in this square and a wall in this square. I've got to have the wall move in that direction first, and then I'll be able to place a door there. So we'll go ahead and let the rest of that wooden wall get created for our masonry. And we'll go ahead in our utilities section. The whole purpose of our masonry is that we can have a mason's bench, which lets us produce various stone items. I'm going to go ahead and put down 2 mason's benches, and I'm also going to put down another carpenter's bench. A lot of the ladder production, wall production, food barrel production is getting slowed down, and I've got idle people because they've only got 1 carpenter's bench to work off of. So I'll go ahead and queue up a second one of those. And since I do have idle people and we don't want that, I'll go ahead and queue up a little more fruit harvesting. Maybe look around for a little more wheat. It's a long walk, and I don't like sending my people that far away. That's a lot of time they're going to have to spend walking, but getting that wheat farm fully planted is so critical early on. That does look like it's all of the wheat that I have available to me without going dangerously close to these froggies, which we see are already starting to encroach onto my territory a little bit. I've got a couple of froggies right here moving towards my people, which could result in some early fights here. A lone villager can definitely handle a froggy most of the time. A group of villagers will be absolutely fine if they happen to be near each other when they're attacked. My real concern would be a few froggies at once all jumping one of my people would almost certainly result in them dying, and that is something that absolutely has to be avoided. We see I'm also running out of wood. I'm going to queue up some more chopping orders. Fruit trees can be chopped down if they don't have any fruit on them. So if I were right now to queue up a chop order over these fruit trees, that would work. If I tried to do the same to the fruit trees over here, it would not work. Something to bear in mind, especially if you don't want to accidentally be chopping down fruit trees, especially early on or later when you're actually trying to plant some fruit trees for regular production. We see some first wheat has now grown. We see it's not called wild wheat anymore, it's just called wheat. This could be harvested and placed inside of the mill, which it looks like that's happened a little bit already. One of the advantages to building underground, which I discussed briefly earlier how I usually do build underground, is that you don't have to stop and build all of these walls. You just mine out your rooms in whatever shape that you want. You don't really need these walls so much. But that does have a negative impact on your people's happiness compared to above ground building. So I'm going to try to focus on above ground building for that happiness bonus, but it definitely slows down your early construction, that you're having to spend a lot more time chopping wood and building walls, which is absolutely a disadvantage early on. We see my second carpentry bench now in place, and a bit of a wood surplus being built up. Once my masonry is completed, I'm going to go ahead and build a kitchen, which is what's going to allow me to turn the flour that's produced by the mill into bread, which is our end goal of that production line. At that point, I'll also start building some personal rooms once I've got my kitchen done. Personal rooms people will go to sleep. We see right now this person's just sleeping outside. That has a negative impact on her happiness. As opposed to if she was sleeping in a room, it would have a positive effect on her happiness, especially if that room is decorated. It also would allow her to heal. If a person takes damage and they sleep in their personal room, it allows them to heal up. When we do see the thatch roof that got placed over this building, I'm going to go ahead and I did not queue up a door earlier, so we'll go ahead and build a wooden door. Idle time like this does have some benefit. It does boost people's happiness to have idle time. What I'm going to do at that idle time is begin mining some in the search for any other materials that might be available. I'm just going to do some long strips like this. I'm mostly interested in iron, but also keen on perhaps finding and mining some coal, some copper, anything else. We see I get a different roof because I did build with wooden walls instead of the log walls. And you'll notice my carpenter's bench has not been produced yet. because one of its requirements is a stone hammer, which I don't have. To build that, I'm going to go in my construction menu here, which allows me to queue up items to be produced. I'm going to go into my utilities, and we see the stone hammer over here, which requires a wood detailer, some stone, and some wood. If I were to click on the left plus sign here, I would say, if I clicked on it once, it would say produce one hammer. Instead, I'm going to click on the right side, and it's going to say always have at least one hammer. So instantly it queued up the one hammer for production, and then it's going to stop. But once that hammer gets used up, it will queue up a second hammer to be produced. So there will always be at least one stone hammer available at all times. And then you can do the same thing for tongs. I'm going to do the same for a bone carving knife for now. It should let me do that. And I'm also going to queue up a bone carving bench. That's going to be useful for building bone armor. You can kill cows and some other animals to get their bones, which then can be turned into very early armor. Basically, it's the best armor you can get without having any iron access, which early on you usually don't have a lot of. So I'm going to go ahead and disable everything in the raw food barrel, and then I'm going to go ahead and enable. Apparently fruit may not qualify as raw food. Oh, because it doesn't require any cooking, that actually does make some sense. In which case, we'll go ahead and just enable wheat, and we'll use this as a wheat barrel, which is not a bad thing to have. But I'm going to go ahead and build a prepared food barrel, which I'm guessing then is what this is going to qualify as for the fruit. And I'm going to put it outside where my eventual kitchen is going to be. Which, now that we do have our mason's bench built, thanks to our stone hammer, which was produced, and we see another one's been queued up. But I'm going to go ahead and produce my next set of wooden walls. And we'll go ahead and right away queue up our wooden door. And we'll place down a... And I'm sorry, I'm not actually going to be building a kitchen right away. I'm going to be building a bakery right away. The bakery is where bread is made. A kitchen is where meat-based type foods are produced. And I actually meant to have that barrel placed slightly differently. I'm going to cancel that barrel. I'm going to move my container over for the raw, or the prepared food container right over to here. And we'll go in the utilities section. Two items that a baker needs to produce the bread, a baker's table and a baker's oven. So we'll queue both of those items up. We see a good amount of wheat's been grown. A little bit surprised it's not being harvested by these idlers. Maybe because it's not required for anything. I'm going to be... Ah, there we go. I forgot to set something else. You can set a queue to pre-harvest wheat. I'm going to go ahead and do that and tell them to always maintain a stockpile of 10 wheat. Whenever there's less than 10 wheat and there's wheat to be harvested, we'll see my villagers will go and do that and start harvesting it. I'm going to do the same for 5 apples and 5 pears, but this is going to fail initially. They won't go and use the wild trees to gather the fruit. You have to plant your own trees in order for those queues to work for that, which I will plan on doing later on. But for now, there's now raw wheat being harvested and ready for the bakery, although it appears I've run out of wood again. I'm going to really try to get a nice big area here chopped down. So as my people go to chop some wood to finish building the rest of my bakery, they're harvesting my wheat, they're mining out some underground areas, so I've got a nice surplus of stone, and starting to try to look for and discover some other more rare materials. In fact, I'm going to basically just go ahead and have one guy dedicated to mining here. You'll see I'm being careful to not mine to where the river is. Mining into the river would eventually flood my entire tunnel, which is something you absolutely want to avoid. But that'll keep one person busy, so I don't want to build a lot of those tunnels, or very wide tunnels that a lot of people would end up being drawn into the mining activity, but I can spare one person to mine out some more. But this, I think, is a good stopping point for my first video. I've definitely been making some progress, getting some resources built up, and I will be back with my next video where I will finish setting up my bread production line, maybe expand out my wheat farm a bit, start producing some other types of farms so that I can maybe cook some meat, and we will take it from there. I hope that you come join me next video when I will also explore this copper vein, which I didn't notice before. Isn't that a fortunate thing? So I hope to see you next video.